Welcome to the Mental Health Boot Camp podcast.
Boo-boo.
This is the podcast where 4 psychotherapists, 3 of us Canadian, 1 of us American, serve you cutting-edge mental health knowledge. I am Dr. Ryan Howes, a clinical psychologist from Pasadena, California.
And I'm Dr. Brooke Lewis, a registered clinical counselor from Coquitlam.
And I'm Joanna Boyd, also a registered clinical counselor from the Greater Vancouver area.
I'm Chris Boyd, psychotherapist from Coquitlam.
Right on. Welcome back, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Although I hear that I may have been part of the beginning of the podcast last week.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Brooke used her excellent improvisational and she became you.
I'm
It's
looking
amazing.
forward to listening to it.
It's what you would sound like if you were a chipmunk.
Okay.
Or had some helium.
Yeah. So,
Perfect.
Or
Yeah.
if you sounded eloquent.
Oh, sheesh. Brothers and sisters, look at you guys going at it. Wow. Well, you were missed, Joe, but you came back on the right night because we're here to talk about Black Swan, the book club. The book club is tonight. We're looking forward to it.
And you are the singer for the intro song for this, aren't you?
Yes, she is. We'll get to that in a second. We have to do a little banter here first.
Sure. What would you like to banter about? Our province is on fire.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are burning down? Is it smoky there or is it more to the east of you?
No, it's to the east of where we are. So it was hazy today, but I'm not sure if that was fire smoke that's blown over this way or what.
I don't
what's
smell
going
it.
on. Yeah,
I don't
me
smell it
either.
outside.
No, but it kind of looks as if it were smoggy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful sunset then, maybe? Do you get that little perk?
Kind of
Sometimes.
like apocalyptic.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's,
Just
some might
checking
consider
our.
that beautiful. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Those-
so current provincial fires, provincial current year fires. So 1,079 fires
Wow.
are right now, which this week there were 133 new fires.
Wow. You guys having lightning storms or something? Is that what's setting them off?
Last week we had some. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess when there's that many, California gets really bad fires too. So I was reading an article about it, and when there's that many forest fires or when they're really big, they create their own weather system because of the smoke and the heat and all the things. But that weather system typically involves lightning, which then obviously starts more fires, so it perpetuates itself.
Nasty.
Yeah, so own ecosystem there. So.
Wow.
So everybody, just there's a lot of evacuation alerts and things for people across the province, and we'll all keep our eyes open and support each other.
Well, I wish you all the best up there. Watch out. Last year was so gross and smoky down here and up there. Let's hope the West doesn't completely ignite this year.
Yes, you had a really bad one last year, you guys.
Yeah, we all did. It was gross all up and down the West Coast. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
Speaking of some of that, we actually have we have gone backwards in our COVID restrictions here.
Really?
Yeah. Yes. We just got news today that indoor masks are mandatory or will be mandatory as of this weekend. So
Oh man.
here in LA, out in Los Angeles County. So this whole Delta variant has been wreaking havoc, and cases have risen again. And so they're using a lot of caution and saying, put those masks back on, everybody. So that's a little different for us.
It is. I wonder if that will be, it's hard to say because you opened up before us, but
Mhm.
I don't know if the levels of who has a vaccine and those numbers are similar, but we're kind of in that place only for a week now, or 2 weeks, I guess, right?
Yeah.
2 weeks. Which is
Yeah.
weird still.
It
not
is.
wear a mask, but that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. My hope is that that doesn't disrupt things like school, things like that that are coming up later on this summer. So, but we'll see. So, fires and COVID. This is just like last summer. What do you know?
Here we are.
Here we are again. That's right. Just like last summer, about this time when we first started the podcast.
Isn't that wild?
Is this our 1 year?
I am double checking. No, it's close though. Our 1 year is the 20th.
So
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
Yeah, next Tuesday. So basically a year. Yeah, basically we've been on a year of these things.
Wow.
It's probably a good time to remind people that we do have a mental health boot camp program.
Well, yeah, we usually do that once a quarter. So yeah, that makes sense. We're overdue. One every 6 podcasts, maybe.
On another note, back to the COVID and COVID situation. I've been watching the show Bosch. It's on Amazon Prime, and it's based a detective show out of Los Angeles there. And it was taking place in January of 2020. So they actually start to talk about COVID popping up, and they made some jokes during their New Year's celebration, like 2020 is going to be the best year ever and whatnot. So it was filmed after COVID, of course, but they started, and then little snippets of that throughout the show. So it wasn't full blown masks and lockdown. I think they're going to skip that part. The season kind of wrapped up before all that went sideways, but kind of building on our conversation from last week with TV and movies, it's kind of neat to see, or interesting to see how they're going to handle this whole COVID pandemic.
That is true. That's right. I've heard some people saying that that Hollywood is getting a lot of pitches for COVID stories, and they're just kind of turning them down because they're like, no one wants to hear more about this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no one really wants to hear more. We've heard so much about this for the last year. Enough. Maybe in a couple of years. We'll see.
Yeah. Did you hear that from Mandy Moore at the gym there or close by in Pasadena?
You guys knew that Mandy Moore lived in Pasadena before I did, so I don't.
No, I think Joanna knew that, but
Okay.
No, I thought you share that fun fact, or did I share the fun fact?
You shared the fun fact.
Did.
I shared about a couple other local celebrities that are from the area.
I can't imagine Ryan would mention Mandy Moore in his list of top 5 celebrities that live in Pasadena.
Honestly, I can't even picture her, so I'm not really sure. But sorry.
Just to offer some context to those listening, Joanna had loved this movie back in the day. What was it called? A Walk to Remember?
Yep.
With Mandy Moore. And so growing up, she probably watched it 58 times, and she had posters in her room. And
I was part of fan clubs.
had a fan club
online, even to the point of like the main actor having a band, and I would like follow the band. Anyways, yeah.
Who's that? Shane West? Yeah.
Look at you. Yep, there you go. Yeah.
Who was in the fan club, Chris? Was it you?
I know.
The truth.
I was in the X-Files fan club.
Oh, good.
Yeah, from back in the day.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Send us your fan club recommendations, people. info@mentalhealthbootcamp.com. And be sure to check out our boot camp. 25 days of wellness exercises for the low price of $39. And that's it.
Yeah. And if you sign up and don't think it's a good fit for you, that's okay. We'll give you your money back. This is important to us that that it is a good fit for you, because obviously there's lots of programs out there. So risk-free.
Risk-free, my goodness. Money back guarantee. What do you know? That's pretty good. Okay, time to get to the topic at hand. No more dilly-dallying.
Oh my gosh.
All right, everyone, pause for a second as we listen to Joanna's rendition of the book club song. Go. That was awesome. Way to go, Joe.
Book
Thank
club.
you.
Book club.
Catchy too.
Book club.
It is a catchy tune.
club.
It's good stuff, really. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know
gonna
where you
be
came up
fun.
with that. Yeah.
So I have to say, I enjoy Joanna's book club song way more than this book.
Oh,
Right.
starting off, throwing
Comes out
daggers.
swinging.
I know,
Comes out
throw
swinging.
it out there. So, okay. So, who here finished the book? Ryan. So
Yeah,
for
I
those
skipped.
listening,
I skipped
Ryan,
ahead towards the end there. Yeah.
did everyone listened to the book? Is that right? I listened. Joanna,
Yep.
Kristen. Yeah. So I'm just looking on my Audible, and I still have 10 hours and 43 minutes remaining.
Oh my
Oh.
gosh. So you
That's how
listened to
far I
about
got.
4 hours.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was, anyway. So I have some thoughts about why I didn't connect very well with the book.
Some thoughts on the first third of the book. Okay.
Mhm.
Jump right into it. What are your thoughts?
You guys don't want to go? No? Everyone's going to wait?
I just also had a hard time. I felt like I was like Felix in like A Beautiful Mind, where like Russell Crowe's looking at the board of, is that the movie where he's looking at all the math and stuff and all the things? I don't know if that's maybe I'm thinking something different, but
Yeah.
I just I felt like I was listening to a bit of a different language. I think it just was very cognitive heavy and very, I was like, I think I need to keep going back 30 seconds because I don't think I actually soaked that in. And I found that for a good first many chapters. So I had a tough one. It was a tough one for me. So
Yeah. I didn't feel that it was very accessible for an everyday reader. Just the concepts and the language, I personally was not prepared for that. And so I think that was part of it. I feel knowing what the book is now, maybe I would dig into it. And I felt, we can get into this more later if you guys share too, but at times I felt I was being scolded by the author, that, or patronized or put like, yeah.
Wait, were you listening to The Gift or are you listening to Black Swan?
I was definitely listening to Black Swan. Yeah, so it was just very theoretical, very heavy. Yeah, very dense. I think it takes a special person to want to read the book and really dive into it. Very interesting, the topics, if you really want to like sink into the topics. I think it wasn't what I was expecting.
Okay. All right. Chris, do you want to say something or shall I jump in?
Yeah, extremely philosophical. My goodness. A lot of references. The first few chapters, especially, were quite heavy. I agree with Joanna. I had to go back quite a few times and just try to conceptualize what he was saying. I agree with Brooke, not the most accessible. I think I didn't, to me, it didn't have the nicest tone to it. Like it was almost like a intellectual arrogance to it, I felt. As he kind of using terms like nerds and fakers and posers and phonies and stuff like that. I think he wrote this book. I think he set out to create a project that could, well, let's say it this way. I guess early on he said he would like to add and be considered a philosopher, right? So I don't think he was writing this for us or the average reader. I think he was writing it for intellectuals and philosophers, like those who are very passionate about those areas. Just the language he was using and the level of sophistication is going to be above a lot of people's heads. There's a lot there though, and I will get into the details of it once we get Ryan's first impression of it. But lots of intriguing information and lots of stuff to ponder.
Yeah.
Definitely changed my perspective on some things. So we'll get into that part of it. So I think it was enjoyable in lots of ways, but yeah, very heavy.
Agreed, heavy. I I thought you guys were going to mention the fact that he slams the French about every few few chapters or so, he gives a hard time. He says, this concept's so simple, even a Frenchman could handle it.
Or business executives,
Yeah.
or he goes after lots of so-called experts, right?
He does.
Yeah.
I don't know what beef he has with the French in particular, but that he really had a real bone to pick with the French. I will agree with you. I didn't know going into it either, Brooke, kind of what I knew. It was wildly popular. It's a bestseller 13, 14 years ago. A lot of people were reading it, and I knew that it had something to do with psychology, and it does, but it's an interesting book where there's an intersection of psychology, philosophy, and the field that he really comes from is economics. And so there's so much there about how his whole kind of premise, and I'm sure Chris will dive into this a little bit more, but he came to this because he was seeing kind of the foolhardiness of people looking at market trends and trying to read into them and see, oh, well, why did this happen? And why did this happen? Oh, the stock market dropped. And people always want to ascribe a reason to that. Why did this happen? And he just wanted to point out that some things are just black swans. They're just kind of flukes. They just sort of happen. This randomness sort of happens sometimes. And even though our human brains try to ascribe meaning to it, we can't always do that. This is his premise. So he would talk about things like 9/11. We couldn't have predicted that and the impact it would have on the country or the world. Or this book was actually written before the stock market crash of 2008, but it became wildly popular after that because a lot of people viewed that as a black swan as well, even though there were indications that this might happen in the market. So anyway, the point being that he does weave together three or more fields that are kind of unlikely bedfellows with philosophy, psychology, and economics. And yes, there's certainly an arrogance to the way he speaks and kind of poo-poos other people's ideas that I'm sure makes him the hero of some and the enemy of a lot too. So that was kind of my first impression as well.
Yeah, for sure. He talked about how some people really think within the box, and I think he used the term kind of the nerds, those who excel academically. But then he really praises those who kind of think out of the box, and I think he sees himself in that kind of light. So you kind of go after those and those who kind of think in a more academic or traditional way.
Now, obviously, I didn't even get close to half of the book. So part of the reason as well that I stopped reading, like it was thick and all the rest of it. But this whole, as a reader, like I said, I felt like I was being like a finger was wagging in my face, like you're foolish for falling into these traps, for thinking in the box or trying to find reason or meaning. And even though we know from a psychological perspective, these things, the reason that we don't ask questions, like we do have stereotypes or assumptions because that becomes automatic thought so that our brain can operate faster. Like it's functional for our evolution, why we do the things we do, like why we don't question absolutely everything. And why we think in certain patterns, and that's evolved so that we and our brains can move forward with the things that are important to us, right? So it was kind of like you foolish human for falling into this trap when really that was our evolutionary development. So I'm curious, for those who got further, did he go into, hey, let's validate why this happens, let's validate why people are looking for meaning, or what purpose this served us and how we got there? Or I don't know, was that part of the book later on? Did I just not get there?
Yeah, I think he touches on that a bit. I mean, he doesn't go too deep into evolution. I think he touches on some of those topics though, but he gets into why, as we're meaning creating creatures, and we want to look at something, and because we want to be prepared for the next thing that happens. So we're trying to look back and see, okay, if this, if the if 9/11 happened back then, and we don't want that to happen again in the future, then what do we need to do to prepare to protect ourselves from the next time that happens, right? And he says that that's kind of futile because I mean, that was a black swan. That's something that's not likely to happen again, at least in that particular way. And as much as we try, you know, people are still, we still take off our shoes at the airport. There are different things that people do that are kind of theatrical safety measures that don't necessarily protect us from the next 9/11, but we do it anyway. And
which is, I don't know, it's so interesting about that one, especially like with 9/11 versus, I don't know, can't even think of another one right now, but some other complete random act. But
yeah,
nobody thought that somebody could run a 4-minute mile, right? And then somebody did run a 4-minute mile, and now a bunch of people have run a 4-minute mile. So a 4-minute mile was a black swan at one point,
sure.
but now it's not. And so who's to say some of these events where he's saying, calling people out like this is futile because it's a black swan, but without those precautions, maybe it would become a white swan. Maybe it would become more common because people would say, wow, I never thought about that. You can do that. I can replicate that. I don't know.
I feel like a lot of things would be black swans as like over time, right? Like we didn't know we could do this, now we can. Like it's almost discovering life and what we're able to do. And I don't know.
Well,
yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna say, at one point in the book, I found it pretty interesting. He says, you know, the whole point is that we can't really predict what the next black swan will be. He says we can predict with some, you know, some reliability that something will happen. So he says people come up to the conferences all the time and say, hey, what's the next black swan going to be? And he said, you know, by its very nature, I'm not going to be able to predict that. I can say that there will be some catastrophe, some worldwide catastrophe that will happen in the next century or half century, but I can't tell you what that will be. And here we are in the COVID, you know. So
I know, I thought about that too.
It's a little bit of
a black swan.
Yeah. But are we? Because here where the critics come in. Because the critics say, is it really a black swan? People have been predicting a pandemic for a long time, you know. The Obama administration had a book to prepare for it. I mean, this is something that people have been talking about. We have movies that are depicting pandemics, you know, including the movie Pandemic or Outbreak. Yeah. And so is it really that far-fetched? Or have some people have been thinking about these things, you know?
Another, just to switch gears a bit, he talked a bit about the narrative fallacy, right?
Yes.
So you say, when looking back at history, we tend to construct an interpretation that fits into a nice story, when it is likely that what actually occurred was much more random and unplanned. I want to believe there was a nice, clear progression and that it was predictable when it really wasn't, right?
Yeah.
So really talking about how developing these stories or this narrative is often inaccurate, right? But we actually use constructing a coherent narrative a lot in therapy. Like I was actually connecting with a client today, and the probabilities came into it. I know he has a lot of things to say about probabilities as well, as we do our best to anticipate things happening in the future, and often we're very wrong, right? But what's wrong with helping someone construct a nice little story or trying to make sense of the past if it actually helps them out psychologically? I guess is what I'm curious about.
Exactly.
What's wrong with that? Is that mean you're saying exactly to that, Brooke?
Like, what is like why? I guess I'm a little bit confused on what he wants the reader to take away from his book, what he wants the reader to feel after reading his book. Is it powerlessness, or is it encouragement? Is it like what? I was just really confused about that, because I'm like, as a reader, I'm not feeling good reading this book.
I think actually, Brooke, one of the things that was sort of a takeaway and maybe a bit of a tell about that point, it was when he was talking more about economic plans, and because he worked a lot with stock brokerage firms and things like that, trying to predict things, and his whole view was, no, you can't really predict much of that. So people were saying, look, how do we make sure that our portfolios grow over time? What's the best method to use? And he said, I think you should put 85% of your money into very conservative, like stocks or bonds and things that are like slow growth that will really never drop, or very low likelihood that they're ever going to drop, and just kind of plug along. And then 15% you put into more kind of wilder speculative things that may have a high upside, or you may lose it all, but these more kind of risky stuff. And I think that's sort of his philosophy for life, basically. That really, I think, he says, for the most part, be safe, be kind of conservative in what you do and what you're shooting for in your life. Be kind of, risk averse for the most part. But for a small portion, 15%, yeah, that's where you can go ahead and go wild and, shoot for superstardom or something like that. So it would be like, if you're a rock star, if you want to be if you're an aspiring rock star, then make sure you have a day job, and then, do 15% of your time spend on superstardom.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of interesting about the narrative piece again is, again, I help clients. I had a client I saw recently, and he got in a car accident. So often we talk about probabilities. This author doesn't necessarily like probabilities that much, because it doesn't take into account black swans, right? So we're often like, he talks a lot about the bell curve, and he doesn't like the bell curve. So it kind of shifted my therapeutic approach, actually, because for a while we're talking about probabilities of him getting in another car accident, because he's already been in 2, right? On the way to our session, he showed me on his car cam that a truck swerved in front of him, and he was kind of rattled by that, because if he was closer to it, he might have got swiped by this car, right? So he said, this is proof that maybe it's not safe for me to drive again, right? So I was taken aback by that, because I'm like, well, taking into account the whole black swan idea, and these 2 accidents he had were absolutely unpredictable. Like, he's a very defensive driver. So I'm like, he's kind of right. We can go off of probabilities, but there's a chance that something awful may happen to him again, right? So instead, we had to call a spade and kind of shift the perspective a bit, moving in the direction of radical acceptance. And okay, if that's the case, then what does that mean? What is there a pivot you can make in your life as a result of that, right? Because this author actually talks, Taleb talks a lot about what we've referred to as metrics, right? He said missing a train is only painful if you run after it, if you allow yourself to care. So he was saying that you got to be very careful about focusing on things that you have control over, right?
Sure. Focus on things you have control over. And the probabilities piece, one of the examples that he uses a lot that I liked was about the turkey, right? So the turkey is born and is fed and cared for every day for 1,000 days. And in that likelihood, that probability would say that on day 1001, the turkey is going to be cared for and fed and everything's going to be fine. But on day 1001 happens to be the day before Thanksgiving, and the turkey becomes the main course, right? So you can't.
For the turkey, it was a black swan.
Not for the people.
But not for the people.
Not for the people. They knew exactly what was happening, right? So it's
the unpredictable part of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So back to that client, we instead focused on, okay, well, if something does happen again, just trying to focus on his ability to navigate through that. So there might be some uncertainty that happens, but he has traits and characteristics that can help him respond accordingly. So that's kind of what we focused on before, because in his mind, it is still kind of risky to drive. So we kind of focus our attention that kind of way. So, yeah.
Good point. I was just going to say, I feel like it's even simplifying it more. Like when we try to help someone say, what are the chances that will happen again, or it'll be okay. Or we try to go with some probabilities, but ultimately you can't guarantee anything. Anything can happen at any time. Yeah, and that's hard when clients are trying to get through things, or get out there if anxieties are coming up and you're like, right, I can't actually reassure you of anything, but we can do your best to help you deal with whatever would happen. But
Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Which-
We're not future tellers. We can't like guarantee to a client that something bad's not going to happen, but we can try and help teach them the skills to manage whatever does happen to them.
mhm.
Yeah. And I think he would support that in terms of
Yeah.
some of his messaging, right?
Yeah.
Is what are those rules that you abide by? What are those metrics? What are those things that you value? Because if you focus too much on probabilities or stats, then you might be setting yourself up for a big surprise, right?
But it's hard too, because he does say in some ways, like with the blindness he talked about for implications for blindness, which was the narrative fallacy, which he talks about, Chris, was people more focus on stories and not statistics, right? Like the one skydiver who his wires get connected with everyone like jumping out tandem and they pass away. And then people now think if I go skydiving, that's going to happen to me. Whereas the chances of that happening are so slim. You actually do look at stats. So he's saying like wasn't he saying like the story, people tend to go with stories like, oh, I heard this happened. Now that's going to dictate whether I go to that restaurant because someone had a bug in their dish, or
Sure.
Whether I tried that one thing because I know someone who had something happen to them. I think that does a lot. I know that totally makes my decisions with certain things.
So it doesn't feel like a black swan if it's a personal connection.
Well,
I think
even
it's
if
just
it's
more, yeah.
even if it's startling, emotionally startling. I mean, a similar argument I heard a while ago saying that you really can't learn that much from the news, because if it's news, then it's probably not generalizable. Like when you hear about a shark attack, that really raises you. Oh my gosh, someone got eaten by a shark or something like that. Oh no. And then you get worried. You don't go to the beach because you're afraid of sharks. When, sharks attack a handful of people every year, but smoking kills millions, or something.
Mm-hmm.
And but smoking isn't news because it's so widespread and generalized, people don't even talk about it. But a shark attack is unique and rare, and then we get fixated on that, right?
Yeah, good point. So I guess he does talk about that a bit, Joe. It's a good distinction to make, is that the way to avoid the narrative fallacy is to favor experimentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Over storytelling.
Yeah.
But I guess therapeutically speaking, though, sometimes the storytelling can be beneficial. So
Totally.
just trying to make that distinction. Yeah.
Well, there's a whole style of therapy, if not multiple styles of therapy, that involve narration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like journaling, narrative therapy in itself, or in some cultures, storytelling is extremely important for healing. Yeah.
Well, and maybe is that a difference then between like individual stories and using a story as a parable or something that would help to guide everybody? When we do work with like trauma, we want people to be able to maybe retell their story, instead of focusing on the victimhood and on the pain, maybe they're focusing on the resilience and the overcoming, something like that, right? Which is personal story, a very important one, to be able to see yourself in a different light and view your story in a more empowered way. But I think he's talking about how you can't just take kind of a one-off story and say that's the way it is for everybody.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your sample size is way too small.
Yeah. We had one guy who went into the ocean and he got killed by a shark. Okay, then everyone's afraid they're going to get eaten by a shark, but the sample size is too small, right? Yes.
Yeah, any other little tidbits information you guys picked up on? I thought it was kind of interesting. You said that it's better to make $100,000 a year for 10 years versus $1 million at first, and then questioning whether you're going to make any money after that.
Yeah, that's true.
It's the more the stability, right? The consistency, you said, tends to pay off. He went after clinical psychologists and clinical counselors.
Did he?
He did.
Out of the pool of experts, we're not maybe
I
most
didn't.
accurate in terms of our.
Here's what bothered me about that. I get a lot of what he's talking about there. I don't think he did a good enough job of defining what expert was. But he just kind of said, okay, everybody, here are the people who claim to be experts and really are. And he went to accountants and a number of other professions that are very concrete and, farm laborers, people who really know they have an expertise in their field. And then here are the people who are not experts, claim to be experts, but aren't. And he went against psychologists, counselors, and
a whole bunch
a
of
lot
other
of
ones. Yeah.
like economists and forecasters and all these different people who are
Yeah.
kind of in the fields that he's been associated with.
Right.
It didn't really define what
Subjective
expertise.
fields. If you work in a
Yes.
subjective field, you're not truly an expert.
Right. So yeah, I'm not terribly offended by that, honestly, because even in the fields of psychology and counseling, unfortunately, even though we have something like the DSM, not everybody really follows the DSM. People interpret things a lot differently. They say that there have been studies where people have been given the same case material and come up with wildly different diagnoses. 10 different therapists come up with 10 different diagnoses. So it's challenging, but I think it's really because of sort of the nature of the work, and because the human mind is not easily defined, and it is a more subjective sort of science that we have here. I know that we can measure things, but a relationship is not just a bunch of numbers. There's a lot of different components. It's very fluid.
Well, in many ways, or some ways, each of our clients is a black swan.
Say more, Brooke.
Right. Maybe, right? But they're individuals. They have their own histories. They have their own narratives. They have their own experiences. No two are going to be exactly the same. They might share similar symptoms, like anxiety being felt in the heart or the stomach or whatever, but there's so much more behind it that it's kind of a privilege or an interesting part of our job. We never know what's going to walk into the room or what we're going to find out that day or what a client's going to disclose. And right when you think you know it all, something else comes up and it adds another puzzle piece. But everyone's different, everyone's unique, everyone's their own black swan. So maybe we're experts in black swans. I don't think the author would like that very much, but maybe.
He actually says in a more general term in the very end of the book that human beings would be considered black swans from an evolutionary perspective.
Shut the front door.
Which would make sense, though, based on where we are today, right? So, we've talked before about maybe the difference maker back then. I've mentioned how it might be that we were able to anticipate harm and danger, and we have the frontal lobes that were more developed. And my goodness, a lot happened over the past couple 100,000 years of evolution, right? As a result, kind of threw things off a bit. Yeah. But back to the whole expert thing, I remember him saying too, correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the reasons is we're too narrow in our scope. So he said, if you talk about behavior, a biologist would talk about hormones. If you talk about to a psychologist, they may talk about experiences, or I forget what he mentioned. If you talk to sociologists, they talk about culture. So I think he was saying you have to look a little more broadly, but ultimately he says way too subjective. So good luck to you trying to come up with any meaningful theories or approaches, because there's too much unpredictability there. So I kind of picked up on it. But Scott Miller, though, remember him? He said that he once made it very clear that we're not the best at what we do, along with so many other professions out there. And he talked about how there's elements of therapy that lead to more benefits, like therapeutic relationship and expectancy factors, and technique is part of that, of course, but he was saying there's a lot more to it than just following the the manualized treatments.
There was, I can't remember what it was that the author was writing about, but it definitely brought to mind Scott Miller. Scott Miller is a psychologist who does a lot of work in outcome studies for psychotherapy and therapy effectiveness. But I remember Scott talking about a study that he did where he asked clinicians to rate themselves. You know, how good do you think you are as related to the average therapist? You know, are you below average? Are you average? Are you above average? Are you excellent? All that stuff. And I think he said that 90% of therapists rated themselves above average.
Mhm.
Right?
That's a common human trait. Yeah,
Yes.
we rate ourselves as slightly above average.
Slightly
for
above
these
average.
kinds of things. Yeah, and the average person rates themselves as above average. Yeah.
And I can't remember what was the thing he was measuring in the book he was talking about, but maybe it was driving or something like that. People always rate themselves as a little bit better than average. So therapists, drivers, we're all a little above average. We don't want to think of ourselves as less than, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's Lake Wobegon for all of us. All the children above average. So yes, he's basically saying that we're crappy predictors. We're no good at predicting things, which I can give some of that. Now here's a saying that I tell to clients sometimes that was challenged by this book. And it usually has to do with other people's behavior. Like someone says, "Oh, I'm going to go to my boss and ask for something," or I'm going to my partner and I want to have this talk about something, and I wonder how they're going to react. And the phrase that I often use is, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. I've said that a lot of times to clients, right? The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, particularly when looking at other people's behaviors. Like, how do you think they might respond to something?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think the author of this book would respond to that?
I just don't see how he could disagree with that though. Like, because I feel like human beings are, unless there's some pretty serious stuff going on, can be pretty predictable, or unless they're really in a bout of change or if are influenced. I don't know. We're not predictable, but it's not like there's random catastrophes. You know what I mean? I don't know. You probably wouldn't like it, but I just think I think we do learn from past stuff. I think you can understand someone from their past behaviors. So
Yeah, and I do think, or from the very small amount that I listened to, that the author was focused more on like events than discrepancies in people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
sure, but do you, yeah,
like psychologically speaking, on an individual level, like I don't know if you would really have a comment on that versus stock market or random acts of terrorism or big events that might happen in life, just things that happen to you versus things that you do or anticipate on an individual level. Like, so if you're consistently thoughtful, and then I come to you with something and you're accusatory, you being accusatory is a black swan.
Yeah, sure.
Because that would seem really out of the norm and odd and whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And unpredictable and unexpected.
Right. Unless we saw some cracks, unless there were some other things, which is, again, some of the critique of the book is that, maybe if you take other things into consideration, maybe you can see that there's at least a probability, or the probabilities are greater that something might happen. Yeah.
Which is a little bit about what we're doing on an individual level, because then that might be like, oh, Ryan, what's going on with you today? Are you all right? Did you sleep okay? How's the family? Anything going on? To try to make sense of why that happened.
Exactly. Again, we're trying to make sense. We're trying to build a narrative around it. Oh, so now we understand when you don't have a cup of coffee, and if you have a fight with someone in the morning, then you're going to be cranky the rest of the day. Sure.
Yeah.
we like to make things, to help things make sense in our field, don't we?
We do.
From distress to emotion, all sorts of emotions, to even irrational thoughts. When someone comes in and they're thinking something that seems wildly off, sometimes we're like, well, I wonder where that belief came from.
Mhm.
Like, oh, of course you think that way because that's the way you were taught when you grew up.
Mhm. For sure. But yeah, I don't think that in our field we want to predict or get into that with clients of like trying to predict the stock market crashing or winning the lottery or being in an accident or anything like that. We're not, these external events, we're not really tracking or trying to help them with those. It's more how to manage the black swans.
Yeah. But also, like, he would warn against being too directive in therapy, for instance, like being too certain. Like if we're trying to conceptualize what's going on, there's a good chance there's unknowns. Those might be factors we have no idea of, right?
And there
So
probably is. There's probably many.
there likely is. So he would say, be careful about being. So he has people that in economics are like, well, give me some advice. And he's like, well, I can't give you, well, I guess he had a bit of a system there about the 90 or 85-15 breakdown, but he was very cautious about being too directive with his clients,
Sure.
right? So I thought that was a good thing to recall. But
I guess it's a good reminder to stay humble, right? To really mention to people what you do know versus all the things you don't know. Like, I'm not able to really speak to that because I really don't know enough to speak to it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's complex. Like another, kind of back to what I was saying a little earlier, like he says you can stand above society in the pecking order by choice, by creating your own idea of success, right? But in psychology, though, we try to look into what success looks like, what happiness, contentment looks like, right? So your idea, creating your own idea of success might actually lead to more harm for you, right? So he doesn't really break down any practical ideas in terms of how to do that. And it's higher level stuff. Like a lot of the book is pretty high level, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty high level. It's and honestly, if I'm going to give a final critique to this, I think it's too long. I think that his ideas could have been told in the 4 hours that Brooke listened instead of the 15 hours that I did.
Oh man. So it's extra rough, just complete side note, tangent a little bit here. I belong to like a book club with my friends, which is part of the reason I encourage this book club. I enjoy book club, but our book club is next week. So I wanted to try and get through this book before starting the next one. And the next book that we're reading on Audible, when I downloaded it, is 17 hours. I totally thought the book was going to be like, we kind of read the previous books, if I listened to them on Audible, were maybe 7, 8, 9 hours. 17 hours. I'm like, how am I going to get that in?
Are these novels?
This one's a novel.
Okay.
It's a murder mystery. Yeah. So I'm going to speed it up. But anyways, 15 hours for this book and 17 for the next book. It's a lot of listening.
Mm-hmm.
Well, should we go ahead and talk about what our next book is going to be?
Before we do that, I would like to know what you would rate this book out of 10.
Oh, good.
We've already gone over whys. If you want to do a brief summary of why, go for it. But I'm curious what you guys out of 10.
I'm actually going to say that I liked the unique. There's some unique material here. There's some good ideas. There's some things, some points to ponder. I like books that, even if I don't agree with them, they make me think about things a bit. I kind of like that. So, but the length and some of the bashing of the French, some other things, I'm going to give it a 6.5.
Wow. Okay. Joanna?
Oh man. See, it's tough because I didn't fully get through it. So I don't think I'm in a position to really, I did my best to kind of look through some of the points I missed. I think it's good food for thought. It was a tough read or listen to for me, but I think, hey, good things to think about, maybe some important factors to consider. I like this one a lot less than the other books, and I rated those around. I'm probably going for 5.5.
Okay. Sibo?
Yeah, so some great ideas. What I mentioned earlier, I don't think he wrote this for the average person. I think he was trying to write something for philosophers and intellectuals. I think he could have simplified things greatly and shortened it to Ryan's point. I think for him it was a project to give himself a sense of meaning and purpose. So I'm curious to know what his metrics were, or how he was creating his own idea of success on this, but probably doesn't quite align with what I look for in a book. But yeah, lots of interesting ideas, and I had to skip through quite a bit of it because I didn't realize it'd be such a heavy read. But I will actually go back and listen to it again, or a little more closely, because it really did make me think in a lot of different ways. Yeah, a bit of intellectual arrogance, so the tone wasn't the most positive, but I would have to give it a 6.8.
Wow, you guys.
Just for the ideas and how he links things together, and he did his homework on this one, that's for sure. It's jam-packed, and I gotta respect that.
All right. I'm gonna give it a 4. And I think I was being generous at a 4. Yeah. So
One for each hour you listen.
one for each hour I listened. Objectively, there's a lot of interesting ideas that's going to make you think. Vocabulary and the writing was dense, but the writer's voice, maybe it was also the narrator on Audible, but then it came across in some ways as arrogant or unprofessional. I don't think it really hit. And then subjectively, I wasn't ready to read the book. I don't think cognitively I knew that was coming. So I just maybe cognitively wasn't prepared, and therefore I did not enjoy it. I'll give it a 4.
I'm curious, Brooke, if you knew someone who was a philosophy buff, who was very theoretical, could this book be a 9 point something in their eyes? Like if it's for the right person?
But I think that would be subjective, because that's their subjective experience. So that's why I'm like, my subjective experience is definitely really low, but objectively, I still think it was really dense. And then, just like the name calling in there and the intellectual arrogance, and no, not really my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Anywho, so what are we going to read next? Any ideas? I suggested we all come to the table with an idea, and I did not prep a book
I thought that we might go with something a little lighter, something a little less dense, something a little more straightforward. And Brooke, you actually came up with the idea of Taming the Worry Dragon, which is like children's book, which I kind of like.
I like it. What a drastic shift from this one. Yeah. I wonder if they sell that in Audibles.
I don't think you'd need that in Audible. I think you have to buy that. Although I'm just checking right now, and there are books similar to that title. I'm not sure which one you're talking about, Brooke, because there's a few of them that are out there. Taming Your Worry Dragons, a manual for children, parents, and coaches.
Yeah,
I believe so. It's usually like I have the manual, and then I have the one where there's the worksheets that you photocopy. So it's a very like a little coil made thing. It's not like a bound book or anything.
Okay, yeah, that's the one here. I guess there's several. I guess dragons and anxiety go together hand in hand. There's another one called Help Your Dragon Deal with Anxiety. Train your dragon to overcome anxiety. This is where you're helping your dragon. The dragon isn't the anxiety. Your dragon is anxious, and you're helping them deal with that. There's all sorts of different anxiety dragon books.
Yeah, this is the one I have. Oop, can you see that?
Yeah, it's still quite there you go.
Oh yeah.
So it's like a little coil. This is on Amazon. Oh no, not available. Yeah, it's just a little spiral bound one. So, but I'm open to any book about taming dragons.
So it seems like it was written in 1990s. Is that right? No, that can't be right. From Jane Garland.
Yeah,
So very
Jane Garland, Sandra
very
Clark.
CBT focused, yeah.
Yep.
I'm
Well,
down
this
for
this
it.
well, we can't get it though, Chris. That one's unfortunately.
Well, Joanna has one, right? We'll ship it down to you.
We'll ship it to everyone who wants a copy. How's that?
Okay. So any other ideas, or should we be a wait and see scenario here?
Well, do you, Chris or Joanna, do you, either of you have an idea?
I had one that I thought of. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but What Happened to You? It's by Bruce Perry with Oprah. I can't speak. Oprah. So conversations on trauma, resilience, and healing. I think it goes a bit into her background. Anyways, that's one that's just come out this year. So I was intrigued, but I could put that forward. But yeah, if we don't want to decide right now, we can let our listeners know first thing next week.
That sounds like an interesting one.
It does.
I like trauma books.
I really like Bruce Perry stuff. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Also we could, hey, and it doesn't hurt to do something like some of us have already done, but like read before, like if we think it's helpful to people who are listening. But it's always nice to read something new together.
Sure. Oh, that's a good point, Joe. I guess we don't always have to go with something new to everybody.
Yeah.
And if there's one where you're like, this was pivotal or really changing, really made me think about something a different way, or really enjoyed it, or I refer this to clients all the time.
We did our book recommendation a few months ago, and we could just go through that list, see what we want to grab there.
Right? Yeah, but I do think reading newer books that are coming out, that's helpful, not just for readers, but for us to see what's out there and what we can further recommend. And yeah.
I vote Joe. What Happened to You? I want to read that one.
Okay.
I'm in too. Yeah.
You okay with that?
Seems relevant, and I don't know who this Oprah person is, but I know who Bruce Perry is.
Yes, the famed psychoanalyst Oprah Winfrey. That's who that is. Okay. Is that okay with you, Brooke?
I'm in.
All right, we're into trauma, resilience, and healing. What Happened to You? Bruce Perry, Oprah Winfrey. That is our next book for 5 weeks from now.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. All right. Well, this is good. I like it. I like it when we don't like a book. It's kind of nice. We get to, or we like some parts, we don't like other. It's a whole book. There's some things we like, some things we don't. We don't have to like all of it. It's all right.
Yeah.
This was fun. I like the story we told. I like the narrative we shared here today.
I agree. I think it all makes sense. It was predictable. Our opinions were predictable.
I knew you weren't going to like this, Brooke. And you know why? Because
I picked it.
Because also it was our podcast is somewhat digestible, so that was good. It's a bit of a difference from the book itself.
Yeah, that's true. It was. I understand it better now talking to you guys about it than I did when I read it.
Really had to debrief that one. Yeah.
Totally. Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, maybe we should just wrap this up then for the night, if that's okay. So that's it, everybody. Like and subscribe on Apple, Google, Podbean, Audible, Spotify, Stitcher, or YouTube. Send your questions to info@mentalhealthbootcamp.com. Visit us on Facebook or Instagram. Tell a friend or two, or a swan or two. And we'll see you guys next time. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Be a swan.
Bye.
Bye-bye.